welcome back to NostalgiaCast. I'm Darin Lundberg.
And I'm Johnny Craddock.
And today we'll be looking at Face Off, directed by John Woo, starring John Travolta and Nicolas Cage, or Nicolas Cage, John Travolta, everyone will say it. Got a special guest, film critic Sara M. Fetters. We'll be having a conversation with her. So I'm really excited to go dig into that conversation. Little bit of a spoiler, like we're recording this intro after we recorded that Face Off, and you actually had to work. We're all set to record. All three of us chatting about Face Off, and you were called into work, and so you weren't able to be there. So it's just going to be, I'm sorry, everybody, a conversation with me and Sara, and Johnny's beautiful face is like
it happens, you know.
Yeah, adult stuff. But before we go ahead and dive into Face Off, I want to go ahead and recap our last episode, which was So I Married an Axe Murderer.
Right.
We had a very special guest. Do you want to recap that for us, Johnny?
Yeah, we brought my wife on, fellow podcaster / author, RJ Craddock. She came and joined us for Axe Murder, and I was kind of reluctant for a long time to want to talk about this movie, but she came on and she brought some, new ideas, and we had a deep conversation about it. And you wouldn't think that'd be the case, but it was, and it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, great. A recurring guest. It's like, I don't know if I want to call her a good luck charm, but we do have her on every season. Yeah. And I'm glad that we were finally able to talk about the movie that she's wanted to talk about for three, something like that, something episodes. So yeah. I'm glad that we were able to swallow our pride and allow our guests to talk about the movie they wanted to talk about. Anyway, so everybody go ahead and listen to that episode. I thought it was a great conversation. Very surprising, a lot of the stuff we chatted about. I was like, I can't believe I'm thinking, well, it's not super deep. It's not like our lives are changed talking about Sorry I Married an Axe Murderer. But I thought some of the stuff we hit on with Mike Myers and the melancholy story with Nancy Travis, I thought that was very unexpected. And so I'm loving these conversations that we're having, and looking forward to continuing them. So again, we're going to go ahead and talk Face Off with critic Sara M. Fetters. But before we do that, let's go ahead and watch the trailer.
All right.
I've been chasing this guy ever since I joined the force. He has no conscience, and he shows no remorse. He's the mastermind behind numerous bombings and political assassinations. He has a felony list a mile long: murder, arson, kidnapping, terrorism, you name it. He's the most dangerous and brilliant criminal mind I've ever known. For years, I've been watching him, tracking him, studying his every move. I know his every mannerism, facial tic, gesture. I know him better than he knows himself. And now, after all this time, I finally figured out a way to trap him. I will become him. Care if I live.
You're not having any fun, are you, Sean? Try terrorism for hire. We'll blow some stuff up. It's more fun.
Plan B. Let's just kill each other.
Okay, Face Off, directed by John Woo, 1997, starring John Travolta, Nicolas Cage, Joan Allen, Nick Cassavetes, Gina Gershon, Harvey Presnell, I think it's pronounced his name, John Carroll Lynch. We'll talk about that. That Fargo connection was interesting watching it this time. But I wanted to go ahead, Sara Michelle Fetters. You are a film critic and editor for Movie Freak. Sorry, I'm the one messing it up here. MovieFreak.com. You're the film critic for Seattle Gay News. You are a member of the Seattle Film Critics Society. You are a freelancer and all-around genuine human being.
Thank you so much.
Anyway, Sara Michelle, how are you doing?
I am doing terrific. It's been a wonderful week, and I've been very excited to sit down and talk to you about one of my favorite action films of all time. So this is going to be great.
Awesome, awesome. Okay, so it's strange because the entire time I've been on Twitter and I've met so many people, so many great people, but it just feels like because I was trying to remember like how you and I met and started conversing, and I was like, I just think I've known Sarah ever since I've been a part of Twitter. Like that's just how my brain works. But the main thing is like I just reading your tweets and things like that. You're obviously you're a critic, so I pay attention to stuff like that. For moviefreak.com, you did a series, and I think this is where I first fell in love with your writing. 1001 great movies, right? Is that what the name
Films,
of it?
yes. It was
Great
actually, it
films.
was actually, I was contracted by the Seattle Gay News to do that.
Okay.
And so it actually appeared there first, and then the following month, so like it started in March of 2000, it started in March of 2021.
Yeah.
And so it was in the Seattle Gay News in March of 2021. And then in April, the March edition appeared in on moviefreak.com. And then the April showed up in the newspaper. And
Okay.
so it was always like the current month was in the newspaper, the previous month was at Movie Freak, and at Movie Freak I would elaborate a little bit more and add links to like films that
Yeah.
I've reviewed or other things that I thought were interesting for that month's feature, for that month's piece. And it was a very, if I can just I'll just talk about it for a second if that's okay.
You're good.
It was a very fun series to do because I had got, so when the pandemic started, one of our local Seattle film critics just dared me to come up with a list of 1,000 great movies.
Hmm.
And I was like, well, who would want to do that? Why would I do that? That just seems so silly. Um, but I had nothing else to do. I was
Yeah.
bored. And so I spent like 6 months putting that list together, just going through everything, looking at like every year of film that I could remember, like over a century of film, and what I had seen from those years. And I compiled this gigantic, massive list, and then just started like whittling it down, whittling it down, whittling it down until I came up with two different lists, which was the 1001 Great Films list. And then also another list of just honorable mentions that almost made the list, but
Huh.
just, it's a century of cinema. You can't do that. Well,
Right.
once I came up with the list, I was like, well, what the heck am I going to do with this now? I spent all of this time and effort doing this. Who the heck is ever going to want to look at this? And who am I to think anybody would, care about my 1001 great films?
Hmm.
And so as like sort of as a fluke, as a lark, I pitched it to the owner of the Seattle Gay News, and I was like, "Hey, are you interested in maybe, if I write like 3 columns on this 1001 Great Film Series idea that I had, and I could talk about it, from the perspective of what got me interested in being a critic, what got me interested um, in being such a cinephile, why do I think they're great?" But I thought it'd be like 2 or 3 pieces.
Hmm.
And her response was, well, there's 1,000 of them, right? I'm like, yeah. And she's like, well, let's just do it for 10 months and you can do 100 at a time.
Yeah.
And so it just ended up becoming this 10-part series. And because it was so long, instead of writing this sort of general, sort of like cinema 101 kind of series, it had to just, because it was 10 parts, it had to transform into something even more personal. And what I discovered when I was doing it was that this wasn't just about a century of cinema. It was 40 years in the life of Sarah. So
Yeah.
it became my connection to this century of cinema and how I evolved during my watching and sort of became comfortable with myself as a transgender woman and my growth and my series and my transformation as I was also watching and learning to love all of these films from so many different eras and my personal connection to the people that influenced me in falling in love with these different films. I mean, there's an entire essay that's really about my grandmother.
Hmm.
There's a really one that was really difficult to write that's about my parents. There's another one that is about my Aunt Lana and, how much she meant to me. Um, there's an entire one about where my name, Sara Michelle, came from. And it just was the nature of the beast. So it's like a journey through cinema, but it's also a journey through Sarah.
Yeah. And like I said, that's it made the difference. That's what made me fall in love with those articles, because the thing is, like, when people write, like, you don't really get a personal angle, but your writing is all about that personal angle. If you read any article that you write, especially any of those pieces, which again are phenomenal, and anybody listening to this or watching, please go check those out, because if you want to know Sarah, that's, you just need to read those art, and you'll understand, where you come from and your love of movies and all that. But the way that you made it personal, and the way that you can read these and that's you, and that's all you're writing. Like, I sense that's you, instead of it just being, like an avatar of somebody that's just talking to the back of the wall or something like that. I mean, that's a trait that's not there for a lot of critics. I don't know if you feel that same way, but like, when I read a critic, I don't want to know like what they think about like an actor's politics, I really want to know where. What I'm basically trying to say is, it doesn't really matter if I agree with the critic or not. I know a lot of people on Twitter these days are like, oh, they have to agree with me or parrot my voice back to me. Otherwise, it's not worth anything. Right. And to me, it's like, but you don't learn anything. I mean, I would rather have a disagreement, but understand where you're coming from and how you got to that opinion, versus whether my opinion matches yours or not. Does that make sense?
It does. I mean, and maybe I'm going to sound elitist right now, and I hope I don't. But one of the things that really upsets me when I look at sort of social media critics or a lot of YouTube critics or whatever is that they they want to tell you that art is objectively something,
Uh-huh.
that such and such film is objectively bad, such and such song is objectively bad. It's art. There's no such thing as I mean, yes, we all agree that there becomes consensus as to like the great films and the bad films. I mean, that consensus over time does happen, but that doesn't mean that that opinion should be set in stone. These aren't the Ten Commandments. There is no objective way
Yeah.
to look at art. Art is inherently a subjective medium, and cinema is truly a subjective medium.
Yeah.
A lot of people will tell you The Room is the worst film ever made. But you know what? The Room sells out screenings.
Uh-huh.
People go, it had an entire film made about its making. People go to it, they have a blast, they have a great time. And I guarantee you that while most people will say, yeah, that's a bad film, but I had a blast with it, there will be some people that say, no, that's a good film because I was entertained, because I had a good time.
Yeah.
It's a good film. That is a subjective reaction because it's art and we all are affected by art in a different way. And and maybe I just read too much Roger Ebert as a kid. Maybe I read too much Pauline. I mean, Pauline Kael, brilliant writer, and she always believed her opinion was the right one. But
Yeah.
you read her writing, it still came from a personal place. She was telling you why she loved a film, why she loved a certain artist. She wasn't, looking at every plot hole and saying, well, because this leads to this and A and B don't necessarily connect, this film is bad. That's not always true. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, we're going to talk about a movie tonight that has so many different plot holes. It's just, I mean, your brain will melt if you start trying to think about them too much. But
Yeah.
you know what? Nobody cares because the film is so masterfully made, so well acted, so well put together, and so freaking entertaining. We don't care. And that is what I try to get across when I talk
Yeah.
about a film. It's like I can get clinical. I can get professorial. I mean, I went to college. I took film classes at the University of Washington. I can do that too. But that's not how I relate to cinema. Cinema to me, whether it is a movie like Face Off, whether it is a movie, like Black Narcissus, whether it is a
Mm-hmm.
movie like the Super Mario Brothers, which trust me, right now I am getting roasted for my review of the Super Mario Brothers. but it's all personal. And if
Yeah.
I can't tell you why I felt that way, then what good am I doing?
Yeah.
I'm not telling you to see a film or not see a film. I'm telling you my reaction to it.
Right. I think these YouTube critics, the first thing they need to get is a dictionary because they're not using words correctly. So yeah, I agree with all that. That's again great point of view there. And again, I know you talked with our mutual friend Robert Yanis Jr. You've mentioned, I think, on your Road Warrior episode, and especially just to date us, like your episode with him on Escape from the Planet of the Apes came out today. So we're recording it the day
Yes.
that he released it. And you specifically mentioned, because he does a thing at the end of his franchise Detours episodes, where he says, how would you rank these? And you're like, rankings are so silly, like, because, and when you said this, I was like, this is exact. I've said this before on Twitter too. It's like, I can make this list, the list that I make best of 2023, 10 years from now, it's going to be a completely different list. And so when people ask me to write lists, I'm like, yeah, but why? Like, I'm giving you like one, it's going to change. And that's
Yes,
because we change. Right.
exactly.
And so, it's that connection that it was like, that's cool. Like, I'm glad. So being able to lengthen that into 1,000 movies, I was like, oh, well, that's a lot. That's hard, but at least it's easier that I don't have to whittle it down to 10 movies that define me.
Even that list, it's like I had spent 6, 7 months coming up with that list. And then as I started writing the pieces, I changed the list as I was writing the pieces
Yeah.
because it's like, because whenever you do any sort of list like this, it's like the sight and sound list. The sight and sound list, for all its pluses and minuses, is still a living thing.
Yeah.
It changes it changes every decade because new voices get added to the pot. And so of course it's going to evolve and of course it's going to change.
Yeah.
My own list changed as I was writing the series because again, it's not something that is, meant to be the holy grail. That this is it's a living, breathing entity that is going to change on my mood, on where I sit at this moment, on reevaluation of something that I may watch. It's never going to be the same. If I was to do that series again now, it would be a completely different list.
Yeah. And you talked about, like, I think Hairspray made your list. You didn't expect it to. What, I'm going to get this wrong. Lingua Franco, is that how you pronounce
Yeah.
that movie? That made your list. And I guess basically what I could look at, yeah, we have maybe disagreements and stuff, but if you look at a
Sure.
list of your 1,000 movies, right? I can see some movies on there that I'm like, oh, she likes that one. So that automatically, that's a connection. Like, you have Godzilla on there. You have Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse on there. And you have stuff like, well, I don't want to call it low art, but Slumber Party Massacre 2 you've got on there and stuff like that. You've got A Mask of Zorro. So it's not, but you've also got the Ikirus and the Antonioni movies and the Bergman movies and the Kurosawa. You've got all the stuff on there that's it's going to sound bad, but high art and low art. You've got a mix of everything because they're going to affect you differently, right?
There's stuff from the canon, and we can call it the Criterion canon, we can call it the Turner Classic Movies canon, whatever you want to call it. There is stuff from the canon because there's a reason that, like, Citizen Kane and Casablanca and Ikiru and Seven Samurai, Solaris. There's a reason those films are in the canon. I mean,
Right.
they are legitimately great films. But we forget about Prince of Darkness, John Carpenter's film.
Yeah.
We forget about Curse of the Demon. We
Right.
forget about old
Flash
Hollywood.
Gordon.
Flash Gordon. We forget about old Hollywood melodramas like Old Acquaintance. These are also important films. These are films that encompass everything there is about the cinematic medium. And that is what I wanted reflected in the list, which is why I can have Akira Kurosawa's Ran and I can have Slumber Party Massacre Part 2 in the same list.
Yeah.
Because it's all part of an ongoing breathing, living entity that is constantly evolving, constantly changing. And if you can't watch Ran and you can't watch Slumber Party Massacre 2 and understand the merits of both, then what are you doing?
Yeah.
how can you call yourself somebody that really loves film? Now, I don't I mean, there's movies on that list that people are going to hate, and I understand that, but I still want you to watch them, and
Yeah.
maybe you'll get a better understanding of why they work for me.
Right, right. And I hope I hope that I can't be whittled down to 10 movies that describe me.
No.
I hope I can't be whittled down to 1,000 movies that define me. But having a list of 1,000, it does that. It gives you a breadth of everything that you enjoy, and you're not limiting yourself. And so, yeah, again, I like I said, I could talk all day with you about this and how much I love those articles. But yeah, everybody listening and watching, go out and read those. There's no better way to get to know who Sara Michelle Fetters is than reading those articles and those reviews.
Well, thank
And
you.
that's great. But yeah, if we wanted to see not just in how you fell in love with movies, but how you fell in love with John Woo movies. I mean, talk about John Woo, but before, see if I want to see how poetic you can get here. But
I'm
if
not
you
going
want
to
to
get that
talk
poetic with John Woo, but I will.
right. But as far as like talking about your love of movies and how John Woo kind of fits in there, like how would you see into that and to give both the breadth of that?
So the first time I saw a John Woo movie was when I started school at the University of Washington, and they did a double feature on campus because they would have movie nights and um, at the theater on campus,
Yeah.
and they showed Hard Target,
Uh-huh.
the Jean-Claude Van Damme movie, and Hard Boiled as a double feature. And I was wanting to see Hard Target because it looked great, and I was like, okay, I'm curious. I want to give this a shot. And I was always one of those people that's like, I'm not really quite in love with Van Damme, but there's something about him that makes me kind of want to keep seeing his movies,
Yeah.
and see if he can actually make a good one. Um, and and this one looked like fun. It looked interesting. It had Lance Henriksen as a bad guy, and it looked fun. Um, but the weird part of that double feature was Hard Boiled was first.
Oh no.
And so I was like, I had no idea what I was walking into,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So Hard Boiled was the first time I watched a John Woo movie. And at that moment, I was like, oh my God. I looked next to my roommate at the time, Phil, and I was like, okay, we are going to Scarecrow. I live in Seattle, and so I
Yeah.
have the world's greatest video store at my beck and call, which is Scarecrow Video.
Yeah.
And I like halfway through Hard Boiled, I was like, we are going to Scarecrow tomorrow, and we are finding as many of this guy's movies as we can. This is the most amazing thing that I have ever seen. And the person that was sitting next to on the other side of me goes, hey, quiet. And he goes, but you haven't seen nothing yet. Just wait for the last hour.
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, and that was when the hospital sequence started.
Right.
And the dude to the other side of me could not have been more spot on. I mean, I was just in awe. I had never seen an action film like that before. It was absolutely glorious. And lo and behold, Hard Target was the best film Jean-Claude Van Damme had ever made. It was no Hard Boiled. I mean,
Yeah.
we all knew it was silly and it was over the top. But for an American version of a John Woo movie, it was pretty dang good. And I mean, of course, later on, I would discover how much studio tinkering there was, and it wasn't quite John Woo's vision and not exactly what he wanted. But it still feels like a John Woo movie when you watch it. When you sit down to watch Hard Target, it's still a John Woo movie.
Right.
And as double features go, that was awesome. But I mean, immediately we picked up, we were able to get Once a Thief, we were able to get The Killer, we were able to get Bullet in the Head, and it was just like, who the hell is this guy? Oh my God. And then, like Broken Arrow was released like the very next year, the year after, I can't really remember.
Yeah.
And again, it's watered down John Woo, but we still loved it. It was still great. I mean, there's sequences in there that are just beyond incredible.
Yeah.
And then, and that just leads us to Face Off. And the first time I saw that trailer for Face Off, I was like, this is gonna, the movie's called Face Off, and I can already tell you without ever having watched it at all, this movie is gonna melt my face off. Um, and it's one of those times where you sit in the theater and everything you hoped for and dreamt comes true.
Yeah.
And that was, I mean, just what a special, special moment to just sit there and go, finally somebody is letting John Woo be John Woo in Hollywood with that kind of budget.
Right. Yeah. Again, you're saying everything that I've been thinking in my head. So that's great. When I said, well, a couple of things, like what we do is like, I don't know if for anybody listening to the episode, the trailer doesn't really have a lot of dialogue. It has the dialogue at the beginning where it's John Travolta talking, or Archer talking about capturing Troy. And then he does the thing where the camera goes behind him and he runs his hands through his hair and the face changes.
So brilliant.
When you're listening to that or audio, you're not gonna be able to hear that. It's just gonna be able to hear the trailer music. So it's a little bit different listening to it as opposed to watching it. And the other thing, when I said, oh no, when you said they showed Hard Boiled first, is Hard Boiled, to show Hard Boiled first and then show Hard Target, it's like these like you can tell that it's the same director, but it's like night and day.
it's like getting the filet mignon first.
Right.
Then you got
and then the appetizer.
Then you get like the bacon cheddar skin.
The
bacon cheddar potato skins appetizer.
Yeah, right after, right? It's like, well, this is why are you serving me the main course first? Like,
yeah, right. See, it was definitely weird, but you know what? I have watched both movies so many times. Obviously, it didn't matter.
Right. Well, it's interesting. This is one of the things we'll talk about, like American movie making versus Hong Kong action movie making. The first time that I ever heard the name John Woo was when Jean-Claude Van Damme, because I know when Jean-Claude was making a name for himself, he was able to say, and I think there was an interview where he said, I wanted to start bringing over these directors that I love. And so he brought, like, I think Ringo Lam was one of them. And John Woo was definitely one of them. And so Hard Target was the first. And so I was like, well, Jean-Claude Van Damme's an up-and-coming action star. He's obviously got some clout. And him bringing this Hong Kong director, I'm like, what is this? And then you watch Hard Target and you're like, even Hard Target, if you've never seen a John Woo movie before and all you've been grown up on is like American action movies, it's still a mind blower. There are things like the kicks and the way he rides the motorcycle and, you know, kicks, all that stuff. It's like, I've never felt, I don't know if it's so much I've never seen something like this in an action movie. I've just never felt the kineticism that I'm feeling.
We've seen stuff in like that in action films, especially from like the, especially during the 80s and a lot of that direct to video stuff. You'd seen it. You'd never seen it that well done.
Yeah.
With that kind of talent behind it, so that you had this great combination of direction, cinematography, editing, performance, and stunt work all working in such glorious tandem. Hard Target is really the first time you got to see that kind of aesthetic, that go for broke Hong Kong aesthetic in a Hollywood film, actually performed by people who could do it.
So when I watched Hard Target, that, like you, obviously I was like, well, I gotta check out. I'm like, again, I'm half Chinese. And so to hear that there's a Chinese director out there that's doing this stuff, I had to. So I watched, I think Hard Boiled was my next, and the difference. So I don't mean to slight Van Damme because he's got a personality, but a persona on screen. But there is a difference between Jean-Claude Van Damme and Chow Yun-Fat. Like Chow Yun-Fat is like the epitome of cool. There's a world of difference, and there's him Woo in his element where there's no, his producers and the studios just letting him go. There's a difference between that and a difference between American filmmakers kind of looking over his shoulder, right? And kind of, I don't know if you should be doing that. And so there's just a difference. And so again, Hard Boiled is a mind blower. That's what you want from an action, right? But then there's also, I think the next one, either watch Bullet in the Head next or Better Tomorrow. And then The Killer was the one that elevated it past just an action movie, because it's got like an operatic, it's got the Chow Yun-Fat character with the Sally Ye character, and just their dynamic, and just the last shot of them kind of crawling towards each other, trying to find each other on the floor and just missing each other. You know what I mean? It's so operatic and so over the top that it had a different level that most action movies, or even Hard Boiled, I don't think quite reached that same operatic level, that emotional level, even though it's hard to fault Hard Boiled. I don't know if I'm making any sense, but The Killer is just, again, bringing that emotion to it is something.
No, I mean, when you look at The Killer and you look at Bullet in the Head, That those two films, I think, are Wu just working on an entirely different level, where he is combining his action chops with storytelling that just is not present in almost any other film that he's ever done. I love A Better Tomorrow and A Better Tomorrow too. I love Once a Thief. I love Broken Arrow. But I mean, the storytelling takes sort of a back seat to the action pyrotechnics
Yeah.
and to how much fun everybody is having doing all of this craziness.
Not that there's anything wrong with that, though, right?
And no, nothing wrong with that at all. They're great
Yeah.
films. I mean, I love all of them. But you watch Bullet in the Head and you watch The Killer, and oh, they're haunting. They're just devastatingly haunting motion pictures. Now, where I do think Hard Boiled separates itself is it has a really solid plot and a really
Yeah.
solid narrative. And it's one of the really first ones where Wu really dives into this nature of duality that he gets into in a lot of his films, especially Face Off, which, we're still going to talk about at some point. Um, but I mean, as far as like an action masterpiece is concerned, there's Hard Boiled and there's everything else that has come after Hard Boiled. There's a reason that a lot of people refer to Hard Boiled as like one of the Citizen Kanes of action films.
Right.
Because you can literally see where everybody just starts emulating it after it comes out. And it's not that Wu is doing anything new or different, much like Wells did in Citizen Kane. Wells used a lot of the cinematic tricks that other filmmakers had utilized. He just utilized them all in a different way and together. And when you watch Hard Boiled, Wu is using a lot of tricks that other filmmakers had been using for a lot of the 70s and 80s in American films and Hong Kong films all around the world. He just used them together and in a different way. And everybody just copied it from that point forward.
The suits are sitting there like looking over Wu's shoulder when he's making Hard Target, right? And it was a big enough hit that it gets him Broken Arrow. And again, Broken Arrow, it's not, if it has the byplay, like the bad guy, good guy, but it's like shallow, it's like surface level stuff, but it's still fun, right? But
No, it's kind of a comic book film.
Yeah. You can kind of tell that he's there, but he's not fully there yet. The American studio, Fox, is not letting him have free reign and really go for it, because I don't think it's weird, because you look at John Woo in China and in Hong Kong, and it's like, this guy's the action master. And then he comes over here and people are like, hold on, like, we got to watch him. It's like, what guys, like, you studio execs in America are just so, I don't know. It's just weird. Anyway, so he does Broken Arrow and it makes 60-70 million US. And that gives him the chance to make Face Off, which is the first full on Woo, maybe the last. I don't know if he quite, Mission Impossible 2 obviously tries to do that same stuff, but it doesn't.
And I love Mission Impossible 2. If you do not ever bring me on any podcast to say bad words about Mission Impossible 2, because Mission Impossible 2 is an action orgasm.
The thing that's just a little bit of a tangent. The thing that's great about the Mission Impossibles is they're not retconning stuff out because audiences don't like it. They took everything, like the mass stuff was really heavy in Mission Impossible 2, and they took that and they use it through the rest of they don't leave it behind. They still utilize it and they implement it. They just kind of integrate it a little bit better and kind of hone it a little bit. But totally, again, I guess Robert, when he does his Mission Impossible franchise, his mega series, he might have to fight both of us to do that one, or he might have to fight him. Anyway, but so with Face Off, again, just to give you a little bit, and then we'll go into it. So with my history with Face Off, just like you said, and I think you mentioned what we were talking before, like, you can look at movies, and I've done this before, and I'm going to do it right now, but I can look at Face Off. There are times when I become disillusioned with movies. I don't know if you've ever felt that. There are times when I'm like, well, I've kind of seen enough. And so I kind of pull away.
I'm a professional film critic. Of course it happens.
But it's kind of like, growing up with your parents. Like, even though you know you're being brought up correctly, you kind of fight against it a little bit, right? It's just integral to your nature, or whatever. So I remember the summer that Face Off came out, my whole summer that I was looking forward to was The Lost World of Jurassic Park, which has some great sequences in it. But when I saw that movie, it wasn't what I wanted or what I expected. And I was so disappointed in the movie that it kind of shattered my ideals of what movies were. And
Mhm.
so I was disillusioned. But when I sat down to watch Face Off, and again, I wasn't expecting anything from Face Off
Mhm.
because Hard Target is great. Broken Arrow was great. I kind of felt like we were diluting Woo's style. And so for him to do
Sure.
another one was like, I'll see it because it's John Woo. And again, when I walked out of Face Off, I
Well,
was
and just to go with what you're saying, and Con Air had just come out a few weeks earlier.
exactly. Yeah,
So you thought you knew what you were in for because
absolutely.
we just watched Nicolas Cage in
Yeah,
a good one. It's good, but it's a fairly standard action film. So
exactly.
I'll let you continue. But that's
Yeah,
also got to be in there thinking, I think, a little bit too, because you
absolutely.
just watched Nicolas Cage in a
Yeah.
very standard summer action film.
Yeah, and Con Air was the same. I was like, I didn't hate it. I was like, yeah, that was fun. It was a it made fun of itself. Like it knew what it was, right? And so, but still, it wasn't like I was kind of like, yeah, but I could. But when Face Off ended, as soon as the credits started rolling, I had the rejuvenating feeling of if movies can do that, they can do anything. You know what I mean? And I walked out, and I literally walked out. I watched it by myself. Walked out of the theater, turned to the screen when it ended, and I said, "Thank you," because I was reinvested in movies, right? And Face Off has the power to do that. So we've talked about our histories with Woo, and obviously it's all leading to this. He's finally got to make the Woo American movie instead of Broken Arrow or Hard Target, which again
Mhm.
are fine, but not quite up to that same level. So with Face Off, it's hard because we can talk in tangents, we can go all
Mhm.
over the place. But if we wanted to kind of hone this, let's talk about the performances first,
Let's talk
because
about that.
yeah,
But I want to interrupt for just one quick
oh
second
sure,
because I think
go
you
for
said
it.
something really interesting
Okay.
when you started your story about how you first came to Face Off.
Yeah.
And you were talking about Steven Spielberg's Lost World, Jurassic Park.
Mhm.
And this is, for me, what you just explained there, your relation to the Lost World and your relation to Face Off, is exactly why I love doing what I do for a living.
Mm.
Because we need, when we look at film, we cannot help but bring our own expectations and hope into the auditorium.
Yeah.
It's what happens. We bring those into the theater whether we mean to or not. I like to tell everybody every time I sit down in the seat, all of my hopes and expectations and everything just go away. I try to say that, I try to live that way, but it's impossible. You cannot get rid of them entirely. And what I love what you said about The Lost World was it wasn't it wasn't what I was hoping it was going to be.
Yeah.
And then when you talk about Face Off, I felt like my faith in cinema was renewed. And the thing I think people forget when they talk about film is that it's real easy to judge a film for what you wanted it to be.
Yeah.
But what we should be doing is trying to judge the film on what it actually is. We can talk about the things that we hoped, we can talk about the things that we wish maybe would have happened, but the film lives or dies on what it actually is.
Mm.
And if it does those things well. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
And the
absolutely.
thing about Face Off is that you had your own preconceptions based on other action films you'd watched that summer, other John Woo films that you'd already watched. And all of that went away as you watched Face Off. And unfortunately, when you watched The Lost World, it was because some of those shortcomings towards the end didn't work for you, it couldn't go away. And you know what? That's exactly how it should be. Not every film is going to live up to our expectations. And the great ones, they manage to just that stuff just kind of vanishes. It just
Yeah.
goes into the ether. The ones that are good, not so good, forgettable, that stuff just unfortunately lingers. And I mean, I think we would disagree a little bit on The Lost World. I think I probably like it a little bit more than you do. But I do agree with you in that it was not the film that I think a lot of people were hoping it was going to be.
Right.
But Face Off is beyond anybody's wildest dreams. And
Yeah.
I love that they paired in the same summer and that you get to talk about them in that way.
Yeah, a lot of good stuff. Again, I don't want to say life changing, but it did alter my brain chemistry. And I think with Face Off, like the Travolta and the Cage performances are part of a larger joy. with the movie. It's
Mhm.
not, that's not the whole reason to go. It's a big reason to go, but it's not the main reason. So my take on the John Travolta, Nicolas Cage stuff, and then I want to get your opinion and see if you agree here. But a lot of people say, oh, they're so over the top and all this, and they're aping each other's movements and things like that. But I've never thought that. I've always thought that it's very nuanced, and it's, you can see Nicolas Cage and Travolta, you can see Travolta and
Mhm.
Nicolas Cage, but they're very small little details like gestures or the way that they talk or the way that they draw out their words or don't draw out their words or are very clippy. And so I've never thought, yeah, Castor Troy is over the top. That's his character, right? But it's not just them going like robotics, like doing like the robot dance with each other. That's not what it is. It's they're informed performances, and there's so many levels to their what they're doing on screen that it's so fun. I don't know. What do you think about that? Is that something that you?
No, and I think one of the great things about Face Off is they did film a lot of the stuff um, when they're playing their real characters. So, Travolta as Archer, Cage as Castor Troy. They filmed a lot of that first.
Mhm.
And we all know at this point, I think anybody watching this and listening to this is they know that especially with Hollywood filmmaking, but most filmmaking, you do not film in sequence. It's impossible. You can't do it.
Yeah.
But it was very smart of Wu and the production team to let Cage and Travolta become their primary characters first. Not just because then they would feel comfortable as those characters, but also because it allowed the other actor to study what the
Yeah.
other was doing. So Cage could study Travolta and see how Travolta was becoming Archer, and Travolta could study Cage and see how Cage was becoming Troy. So that when they actually swap faces and become the other character, they're actually playing the character as the other actor would. So it's not just, Nicolas Cage playing two separate characters. It's Nicolas Cage playing Castor Troy as Nicolas Cage, but then also playing Sharon Archer as John Travolta.
Yeah.
And it's mind-blowing to see them do it and to see how just confident both of them are and how they picked up on subtle little ticks and quirks and vocal inflections that the other was adding when they were playing their part so that they could do the same when they were also playing the part but with the other one's face. I mean,
It's wild. Yeah.
it's wild. It's incredible stuff. And no, I mean, by the nature of the film, it's always going to be a little bit more extreme. It's going to feel larger than life. It's going to feel over the top. But what makes it work is that the emotions are authentic. The emotions are real. And this is where Wu lists a lot of different filmmakers and a lot of different films as his influences. But one of the ones that always it surprised me initially and then completely didn't surprise me the more I thought about it is when Wu talks about Douglas Sirk.
Oh yeah.
Because you think of like Written on the Wind or some of the other in the other very very famous Douglas Sirk films. They are old school, larger than life, Technicolor,
Soap operas.
glossy soap opera melodramas where you're
Yeah.
grabbing for not one Kleenex, you're grabbing for the whole box.
Yeah.
But then you sit down and you watch The Killer. You sit down and you watch Hard Boiled. You sit down and you watch Bullet in the Head. You sit down and you watch Face Off and you go, oh, okay, yeah, yeah, no, I get it. Yes, he is completely unafraid to let these big, burly, macho, actiony men have emotion,
Yeah.
feel something. And you know what? Because they feel something, we relate to them and we're involved with their story. And we want to see them succeed.
Right.
And if there's tragedy, it's going to break our heart, like in The Killer.
Yeah.
And if there's joy, it's going to bring tears to our eyes as it does in the final scenes of Face Off.
Right. Right. Well, yeah. Again, you look at like Nicolas Cage has the reputation now of kind of like just phoning it, not really phoning it in, or just people don't think he's a good actor
Oh,
because he's
I
shown
got
up
into
on
a
these
bad
director
argument
stuff.
about this the other night. I do not
Did you?
agree that he is ever since he's paid back his taxes. I do not think he's been phoning it in at all this past
Right.
decade. I mean,
But
you look at Mom and Dad on, and I do not think he has been phoning it in
yeah.
any film, even the bad ones. I do not think he's been doing that.
Right. And it's unfair because he is a very nuanced director. And it just seems like a lot of like he's the over the top stuff is really what people are focusing on. What's
Sure.
great about him in here is you've got Castor Troy. You can go and you can watch Nicolas Cage's Renfield, right?
Oh my
But
God.
then you can switch it and you can watch Nicolas Cage as his character from Pig, this very nuanced, like feeling kind of person. And the scenes
Mhm.
with Eve, that when we'll talk about it, the dentist story that it gives, like he's very nuanced. And then Travolta's great because, we lost track of Travolta, like Saturday Night Fever and all and Blowout and all those things kind of, that was a big boom of his career. And then he kind of like faded, did Look Who's Talking, like 17, stuff like that. And then Pulp Fiction came back and that was, oh, John Travolta's great. We love him. And then
Get
Get
back on
Shorty.
top.
Yeah, like, oh, he's great. And then with Face Off, the part where he's disarming the bomb and he takes off his jacket and he's doing like the matador and the dance, it's like, oh my gosh, he's having so much fun. And you feel how much fun that he's having, and it kind of feeds off of that. It's just such a joy that scene, even though
And
he's
then
playing a bastard. Like we
it's
love
so
him.
great that you bring up that scene though, because it's again exactly what we watched Nicolas Cage do at the beginning of the film when he's arming the bomb, where he's in the
Yeah.
priest getup and he's basically flamboyant and showing off and um, he- trying to seduce the choir.
Yeah.
I mean, it's you can tell that the two of them have studied one another
Yeah.
because that scene is such a perfect example of that because Travolta saw what Cage was doing early on and then took that to an entirely different level when he disarms the bomb.
Right, right.
But it still fits and it comes together, and you believe it's the same character, even though there's two different actors playing it.
Yeah.
It's still the same character.
What's funny about Face Off is you try to explain it to people and you sound like a crazy person, right? Like you're trying to explain how cool it is, and but you finally stop. You're like, you know what? Just watch Face Off and you'll understand what I'm talking about. You'll get it, right? And you do. You get that. Their performances are in tandem with it, and that's what I love. It's not just them kind of aping each other or making fun of each other. They're working together to give these fully nuanced, full human performances, even though Castor Troy is over the top and flamboyant, like you said. But it's not just, they're just feeding into each other. It's lovely to watch. And I think
Well,
when people say it's over the top, that's not giving them enough credit.
look at Travolta in the scene with Dominique Swain where
Yeah.
he gives her the switchblade.
Uh-huh. And he's so
It's a
cool.
brilliant,
Yeah.
it's a brilliant scene.
Yeah.
I mean, there's nothing over the top about that sequence. I mean, that is actually just so beautifully and seductively and maliciously underplayed, and how he just worms his way in the most vicious way imaginable into his arch rival's daughter's heart and makes her believe he cares for her when he's actually just fooling with her.
Yeah.
And it's such a just incredible sequence. And then you juxtapose that a little later on with Tage returning home and trying to convince convince Joan Allen that he is her husband, even though he's wearing the murderer of their son's face.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And he stripped bare in those sequences. And he knows that everything he's telling Eve, she cannot believe because her eyes are telling her something completely different. And
Right.
yet Cage just strips himself completely and utterly naked, right down to the bone in that sequence. And it's just extraordinary to watch. The one thing we're missing here, and I'm sure you're going to get to it in just a moment, is Joan Allen,
Yeah.
who really is the heart and soul of this whole film. And yes, that year's Oscar Best Supporting Actress lineup was stacked, but Joan Allen should have made the cut. She is that good in this movie.
Absolutely. So I want to get to Joan Allen, like you said, but I also want to talk about Gina Gershon in the movie, kind of leading into that. So you're talking about the part where he's talking. So he's talking to Jamie, right? So Troy as Archer. Again, I sound like a crazy person, but he's talking to the, and he gets to her like Sean himself never was able to get to her. right?
No,
But then you juxtapose that with Troy, with Sasha, and he's being human and open and calm and loving with her, and he's getting through to her in the way that Troy never got through to her. So it's an interesting juxtaposition. But you two, so her performance is great. Gina Gershon is great. I don't think she's kind of been utilized as the smarmy, sultry type, but she's, again, in this one, you can tell that there's so much more underneath that. She really sells that character, especially with the character of Adam, right? But then, like you said, you talk about the scene where he goes to see Eve. And in that moment, the note that I had in the mental note that I had in the movie theater was, we're forgetting, and this scene, Joan Allen, she doesn't even say anything. It's just her reaction, right? Her reaction tells you that this movie is not just about the men. There is actually pain, and this woman is experiencing the same. So it's about more than what the two dudes that we're watching. It's about her, and she grounds the movie and gives it that, like you said, she's the heart of this movie. And that scene, just when he leaves her and she's just shaking because of the experience, it's like so powerful. And again, so we talk about Travolta and Cage. I don't think we talk about Gershon and Allen as much as we should, because again, we
should talk about and Dominique Swain is also she's also very good in one of her first roles in this movie too.
Well, the thing that's great, and we'll talk about the action too, is the first action scene, the way that it's at the airport with the plane and the helicopter and the two guns, it's staged
real plane.
Yeah, that's what I have that note in here. It's physical action, right? There's no CGI. But the thing that I love about that scene is that would be the ending to any other action movie, right?
Yeah.
When that scene ends and he's got Troy, and that's Archer has him, and that could be the end. He goes home, and there's the stuff with Jamie. There's pain that's going on. It's not over. There's still more stuff that they have to deal with. And that's one of the things. So again, we talked about Gina Gershon, we talked about Joan Allen, and there's also the stuff with Castor and Pollux that I love, that it's Greek mythology. Like they read that in there. The note that I have, what Castor and Pollux were Lita's twin sons by two different fathers. Now this is Pollux is the son of Zeus. So they're mythic. You have Eve, obviously, and Adam is the name of the boy, right? And in the religion that I grew up with, the archangel Michael becomes Adam. And so again, it's Adam, it's so interesting that they have all these, it's not just names for namesake. Even the names have meaning, right? But what I love, and let's talk about this for a bit, is there's the action, but there are moments, and the movie keeps doing this over and over and over again, where it gives you these shattering human moments that you don't expect from an action movie. And that's, so the first scene, when you see, first of all, it's the assassination attempt, right? Where Troy tries to kill Archer, and he kills Michael.
Killing of a kid.
What nails that, other than, okay, so I'll get to it, but so the son gets shot. You find out, you see Archer on the ground, he's shaking, he looks over and he stops shaking because all his attention now is on his son. He sees that Michael's been shot, right? But then what sells that moment is all of a sudden you cut to a close-up of Troy and he reacts like, shit, like I did not mean to do that, right? Like he has a reaction that's empathetic. And it's that, from that moment, I was like, this movie is going to be something special. Like it's different. Like you're making me feel for the villain. You know what I mean? That he didn't mean it, and you get that. And so that's just the first instance of it being something different.
And I mean, what you're saying is spot on. But what makes what Cage does there again so good, and what Wu probably was talking to him about, is that reaction happens over the course of about a second and a half.
And he sells
you can watch Cage as Castor Troy have that initial reaction and then immediately just wash it off.
Yeah.
And that is just, it's something else. I mean, it's really, and the only thing I can kind of equate it to, as far as like a shocking initial moment where you see this sort of thing take place and how it just sets the tone for everything else to come, is, of all things, John Carpenter's Assault on Precinct 13. And I don't want to ruin it for people that have never watched Assault on Precinct 13.
I know what you're getting at. Yeah.
But there's a moment with Kim Richards from Escape from Witch Mountain that is very infamous. but it changes the tone of that film for the next hour.
Yeah.
And in that case, we're like 20 minutes into the film, and then this moment with Kim Richards occurs, and you're watching something you've never seen before, and the roller coaster just starts and it doesn't stop. Here, that's the first thing we watch. The first thing we see is this moment with Michael. And then we are off. We are just right into the first centerpiece action sequence. And this movie's 2 hours and 23 minutes long, it's 2 hours and 20 minutes long. And there's all of these big emotional high points and all of this melodrama and all of these authentic three-dimensional characters, but it barely ever slows down.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like it mixes these in, but it is essentially a 2-hour roller coaster.
Right. During that first action scene where he's chasing after Troy in the helicopter, it's all character driven too. I mean, what the note they had, you could see that his frustration with his team before they go out, leaving Eve on hold. He has that look where he sees her and then they go out and he has a blatant disregard for, I think Winters is her name. Like he doesn't, he like when she gets killed, he brushes right because his focus is on Troy. So what's great is you can tell that he's just obsessed, like the obsession is set in. So it's character driven. Like he's obviously after and killing this guy and getting back in revenge or whatever, but it's about so much more than that. There's about so much more than just nabbing the bad guy. And again,
that's what the great action films do, right?
Yeah.
That's what the great action films do. And I think Christopher McQuarrie just mentioned this the other day, is that, having an action sequence just for the sake of an action sequence, it's fun, but it doesn't ultimately mean anything. An action sequence still has to be character driven. Yeah. And so when you watch like Die Hard, or you watch Face Off, or you watch any of the Woo Hong Kong films, or you watch the last 3 Mission Impossible films, or you watch the first 4-ish Jason Bourne movies, all of the action creates and builds character. It's not just there to be there. It's not just there to show off. Yeah, it's fun to watch Tom Cruise hanging off the side of an airplane in Mission Impossible, but that doesn't mean anything if it doesn't actually build that character. And the thing with Face Off is that opening action sequence tells us everything we need to know about who every single character is in the entire film. And then every action sequence after that builds on it and shows different shading and different nuances and allows each character to change and evolve and become more human, even when the stuff that's taking place is increasingly outlandish.
Yeah. It's not just the action building on itself either. It's also the emotion building on itself. Like I said, this movie, it keeps giving you scenes that break your heart instead of it just being purely action, right? So talking about it, so you have like you see the beginning where Adam is killed and all this stuff. You have I love their how did this get made, calls it the face waterfall, where they run their hand and they make fun of it for the whole episode. They cover it, but I'm like, but guys, that's a lovely familial gesture that a lot of families have. It's like, I get it, it's something to make fun of, but that's a human connection that we have, right? So there's that. I like when they capture Troy, but then it turns out he's planted a bomb somewhere, and so they have to react to that. And then Archer is given this thing of, oh, we can switch your face, and he's like, no, like you're gonna like, and he doesn't. What's great about the movie is it doesn't just go right into it. Like he rejects it, and that's when we meet a Dietrich. That's when we meet Sasha. We meet their characters, right? And there's the character thing where Archer threatens Sasha's son, and it's like that's got to be the low point for him, because this whole thing hinges on his son being killed, right? And so all this stuff, and it kind of humanizes the villains in a way. Obviously, you have the first time that Archer and Eve meet each other and he says it's over and they embrace and John Powell's music rises. That's an emotion. When he's talking to her on the bed and they're connecting and he says, I've got to go away one more time, right? And he grabs her and, and they have a fight, but he's got to do this, right? That's emotional. And when he wakes up and he's got Castor's face, he's like, I am Castor Troy. Like he's trying to tell himself that this is who but then he starts doing the Nicolas Cage thing of like melting down as he's yelling this. So it's like, is he becoming the monster, right? So you have that. And then when he escapes and you have that, holy cow, the over the rainbow sequence, man.
Yeah.
When I was sitting in that theater, I was like, what is this? Like, why is this in this action movie? And number one, what's great is that I think Wu came up with it on the spot. Like, it wasn't part of the script. He was just inspired. And the producers was like, no, we're not going to let you do that. And I think he was like, well, I'm going to have this in my movie. Like, I'll use my own money and have it in. And then they ended up paying him back later when the movie became a success. But first of all, having the Olivia Newton-John connection, I thought was neat, singing that, because they couldn't get the rights to Judy Garland or whatever. But when you play, and I'll let you talk about this too, when you play Over the Rainbow, and it's like, somewhere, where it's a brighter, and you see all the action and these people dying, and the girls like getting shot, and there's an irony to it. And then you have this stuff with Adam like barely avoiding like the bullet fire. And it's just, the note that I had here is, I can tell this movie is being directed. It's not just action for action's sake. There is a point to what's happening here. What did you think of that Over the Rainbow scene? How did that affect you?
Oh, it's an incredible sequence. I mean, it's really it's up there with it's up there with the hallway assault in Hard Boiled.
Oh yeah.
So like that if you remember the hallway assault where both Tony Leung and Chow Yun-fat are walking down the hall, and it goes from like it periodically slips into slow motion.
Yeah, right.
But it feels like it's all in one take, and then it culminates with Tony Leung accidentally killing the cop in the elevator. Right. It's like maybe 3, 4, 5 minute stretch of film, but it's just stunning stuff. This is that stunning. I mean, and it's completely different in that almost all of it is focused on Adam and how he is making his way through the scene. And most of the action is happening around him.
Yeah.
So yes, we get to see, every now and then it cuts to what's happening and what's going on, and we see bodies flying and a lot of the Wu trademark, people jumping around with 2 guns and all of that sort of stuff. But the majority of it follows Adam through the sequence. And so the action is actually happening on the corners of the frames, at the top of the frame, it's not ever centralized, because we're focused on this kid and his journey through, which then culminates in Sean Archer as Castor Troy saving the son of the man he's trying to kill.
Yeah. Yep.
And it's glorious. It's just really so well done.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's this whole movie. I mean, this whole movie is just it's just, as you said, trying to explain it to people is just it's insane, because it goes from like standard over the top Schwarzenegger style action to open, and then suddenly you're in the middle of a science fiction film, and then suddenly you're in the middle of a prison break movie, and then suddenly you're in the middle of this outlandish slow-mo Hong Kong action phantasmagoria, and then you have a boat chase. I mean, it's just wild, trying to like explain everything that happens inside this film and how they fit it all into 2 hours and 20 minutes. I still don't know. I've watched this movie like 20 times, and I still can't quite figure out how they fit it all inside the running time that this movie has. How is this thing not 3 hours long?
No kidding. Again, it's got that operatic feeling to it that, again, most action movies don't have, right? Still, the emotions, that Over the Rainbow and any other movie, you would think that would be the emotional high point. For me, it's not. Like, when Archer as Troy goes and confronts Eve in the hospital, and they have a moment where he does the face waterfall, and then he backs up and he tells this insane story that you're like, what does this have to do with anything, right? About how he's on this date with this woman, and he didn't know that she was a vegetarian. They went and ate surf and turf, and she chipped her tooth, and he went to and then he says, and even though like your chip was tooth and the dentist fixed the wrong tooth and it hurt, you still kissed me. And there's this connection. And again, I was like, what is this movie? Like, why does it keep doing this? And that scene like gets me teary-eyed just because it comes back to Cage just not going over the top and being sincere and being heartfelt, right? But then too, you have, and it still doesn't end there. I love John Powell's piano motif for Sasha, that gentle piano. When she gets when she gets shot and you don't realize it, and she's, because again they have the face off, which again is a very, obviously face off, it's very woo with the, the Mexican standoff stuff,
Yeah,
like that.
you got to have it. You got to have the two
And the
guns
dubs and the
everything.
dubs, everything, right? But then when the chaos happens and then it cuts and it has Sasha just on the ground clutching and holding on to who she thinks is Castor, right? And the music plays and she's like, just make sure our son doesn't grow up to be like us. And then it sees the blood. And again, it's like, even when Dietrich gets killed, right? We've empathized with him. We don't want him to die, right? Well, yeah, he's a bad guy, obviously, but we feel something when he dies. When Sasha dies, we feel something. There's an emotional.
Castor's reaction to Pollux.
Yeah,
I mean,
there's an emotion to it, right?
It's like Pollux is completely amoral. There is nothing that as great as Alessandro Nivola is in the film, and he's great. There is never one redeeming moment for him. There's nothing that he does in this movie that makes you care about Pollux's fate one way or the other. And that's by design.
Yeah.
And yet, when he falls and Castor's reaction, Castor is Sean is Castor. Right. Again, brain melting here. But his reaction to seeing his brother on the ground, for a second there, it kills you.
Yeah.
I mean, it really does. And then on the flip side, you're almost like the other FBI guy that's like, hey, that's Pollux, who cares?
Yeah, right.
But then part of you kind of says, you know what? You just deserve that bullet in the head for how you reacted. He didn't. His reaction was probably the correct reaction. He didn't deserve a bullet in the head. But Travolta is so good in that moment. And Wu has, again, just made us, our emotions, so conflicted and twisted into these bizarre little pretzels that we almost are glad that Travolta has just shot one of the good guys in the head. Right. How perverse is that? How just bizarro land weird is that?
Right. Well, that's the Wu dichotomy. That's the stuff in The Killer with the villain and the teaming up and all that. That's even when Troy is trying to save Dubov, like he's trying to hold on to, like, there's an emotion. He doesn't want him to die. He's trying to save him. Right? Why is that in there? Like, I kept that. Why is this in an action movie? This is too good for, that sounds bad. This is too good for a regular action movie. And yeah, you talked about the flaws and everything. And the biggest, like, I don't buy for a second that they can just switch faces and the doctors, we'll get rid of those love handles. There's a whole thing with biology that we're not thinking about. Like, how would Eve not recognize like his more private parts, stuff. It's they had to switch brains, not just faces, right? So
she's a doctor. Yes, they're close to the same height, but they're not exactly the same.
So you have that's not believable at all. Like they kind of give lip service to it, and it's funny. Yeah, it's funny because like they kind of just hand wave it, but what sells this movie, and we can go on to the nitpicky stuff. We can really just go. We can go. I think the thing with the magnet boots in the Echelon prison is like they don't sell that like emotionally. So that's where I'm kind of like, this is a little too much. So, but we can go off on these flaws. But then there are moments. So when after the Over the Rainbow sequence, when it's Troy and it's Archer talking to each other, and they're in front of the mirror, and Troy says, "Let's just kill each other," and they flip. And they're both looking in the mirrors, literally. And again, I apologize. Like in the theater, I said, "Holy shit!" So I was like, "What?" Like that. This is blowing my mind because it's not.
And it makes it easier for them to shoot one another because they're looking at themselves.
It's amazing.
So weird.
And even though the flaws of the movie, I don't buy the central conceit. It's the drama and it's the emotion and it's the acting that sells even the most ridiculous stuff. And that takes a real talent. I don't know. What do you agree with that?
Oh, I totally agree with that. But I have to ask you, I got to ask you this one question. And I would love to like sit down with Tony Gilroy and ask him if I'm right. As absurd and as just bizarro and as otherworldly as the whole prison sequence is with the magnetic boots and all that, I will take bets that the entire prison sequence in Andor was influenced by this movie. Don't you think? I mean, it had to have been. It had to have been.
It's too idiosyncratic to not come from Face Off. And that's, again, it's that influence. It's people trying to ape that too and have that. It's, I don't know. It's just, we could go on. This movie is just, it's so much. And again, you come down to that ending. I don't think they planned on bringing Adam back. And Wu, I think this is a story. Don't quote me on it, but he said we've got to. It wasn't in the script. We've got to bring him back. And the executives were like, no, audiences don't want to see something like that. Like they don't want stuff. And when they showed it to audiences, and it was without Adam coming in, the note that they got was from the test screenings was, why doesn't the kid come back? Right? We need the kid back. And so they went and they reshot it. And holy cow, the way. So the movie opens with it being gauzy and dreamy when Michael is killed, and it ends in the same way where it seems like a dream, but the look, so Eve sees Sean coming, she runs to the door, she opens, but he's not there, and then there's a moment where he comes around slow, and they look at each other, and they just recognize each other. It's going to sound weird, but they recognize each other's souls, right? They recognize, and they embrace, and then Jamie comes out, and there's the laugh line with "I'm sorry I shot you," all that stuff, whatever. But then he brings in Adam, and Jamie gives him the face waterfall, and it's the ending that it needed, because that kid just would have been out there, right? Doing nothing.
It's the perfect ending, but again, it's the perversity of this movie. I mean,
yeah.
He basically replaces his own dead son with the son of the guy that killed his son, with the blessing of the mother who thinks she's talking to the father when she gives the I mean, it's gross. And yet it works. But I mean, can you imagine that kid? I mean, when Adam gets to like 15, 16, 17 and learns the truth. I mean, and maybe that's part of what, I honestly do want this to happen. I really do hope it happens. It may not. It may just be one of those things that falls through the cracks. But if Adam Wingard and Simon Barrett actually do make
Face Off 2,
Face Off sequel, I actually do hope it's about Adam, because it has got to be royally up. Excuse my language. I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
Kid, when he learns what happened and where he came from and who his real parents are and how he came to be with his family, who he obviously is probably going to just love to bits. Wow, there's a mind blower for you.
But that edge, I think, still adds to the movie, right? I mean, it's part of its personality. So again,
it's part of how it had to end.
Yeah.
But it's so weird,
right? I'm not a Mission Impossible 2 hater. I actually do like it. I like it maybe the least out of all of them, but that doesn't mean I don't like it. Again, it goes back to, it's not quite on the level of some of the greater Mission Impossibles, but that doesn't mean I still can't like a lot of Mission Impossible 2, right?
I actually like it far more than the third one.
Okay, that's a great opinion. I know some people that have that same opinion, right? But it's all about that subjective viewpoint. And even though I don't think that Wu in America, because Paycheck didn't do it for me, Wind Talkers didn't do it for me. Like, I just, after Face Off, I think maybe I don't know.
I will fight for Wind Talkers, especially the director's cut.
Right,
I will totally fight for Wind Talkers. But I do get it. It's
he doesn't quite reach the level.
Yeah. I think Cage and Slater are really good in that movie, and Adam Beach is just.
Yeah, no fault in the act. I just, as far as the operatic stuff goes, I like that John Woo, and I haven't seen Red Cliff yet, because I've never been able to get a hold of the two different parts. Yeah, so I want that to be his return to form, right? So he's
if you haven't seen Red Cliff, you got to watch Red Cliff.
Okay, yeah, that's on my.
But I would watch. I mean, the shortened version is good.
Yeah,
the full experience,
right,
is just otherworldly,
and that's what I want. Again, John Woo has been just having my mind open and being able to see and feel new things and appreciate new action aesthetics, and that's it. He still made a stamp that's, you watch Face Off today and it's like, you can see the wires on the guy sometimes, but that's old-fashioned filmmaking. I mean, that's the appeal of it.
We get John Woo back making a Hollywood movie this year, and it's his first time in since since Paycheck. I'm excited for it. I can't wait.
Bring it, right?
Bring it. I mean, it may be terrible, but I'm excited to see what happens. And you put Joel Kinnaman in a John Woo movie? Yeah, I'm there. I will totally see that.
Absolutely. All right. Well, so with Face Off, again, everybody knows that I love it, right? I mean, we've talked about it. How would you, if you could give us like a final word on Face Off, how would you sum it up? How is it personal to you? What does Face Off mean to you? And why do you think this movie is, even though it was made almost 30 years ago, at 25 years ago, something like that, why are we still talking about it with such reverence today?
Well, it's because of, I mean, yes, the action is extraordinary. And yes, it's so much fun to watch these two great actors at the top of their game, and Travolta and Cage basically play one another as they're going throughout this film. And yes, Joan Allen is the emotional heartbeat of the entire thing. And all of that is true. But I think what makes it just stand the test of time is that, like all great films, not just action films, although, action, horror, any genre, any like diehard genre film, there is an aspect of truth that allows us to believe in the authenticity of who these people are and what it is they are experiencing. When we go back and we watch Steve McQueen in Bullet, yes, we want to watch the car chase. But we're watching Bullet because of McQueen and the gravitas and the authenticity he brings to that character. It's that character's journey throughout the entire movie that has allowed that motion picture to withstand over a half century and still be considered one of the greatest action spectacles of all time, even though there's only really 2 action sequences in the entire movie. That is, Face Off has 75 billion action sequences.
At least.
It doesn't really. It has, what, 4 or 5. Right. But I mean, it is basically one long action sequence. None of that would matter if we did not believe who these people are and if they didn't come from an authentic place. And that, to me, is why it has just made such an impression in ways that Woo's other English language films just haven't. We'll go back and we'll watch Hard Target and we'll watch Broken Arrow, and we'll even Paycheck plays on television all the time. I mean, it's a fun, silly movie. It's not great, but it's got its moments, and it's enjoyable in a sit on the couch and fold laundry kind of way. Face Off is a movie that you watch. When it comes on, you become lost in it. And that's what the great films do. And that is what Woo's Hong Kong films did, is you got lost in them. And when they're on, you can't do anything else.
Yeah, they're transporting, right? They transport you, and you're involved, right? And the authenticity that you talk about, again, that's one of the things that makes you, right? It's the authenticity, and that's with your writing. That's the thing that I fell in love with, and that everybody should fall in love with and appreciate. I can't tell you how appreciative I am that I'm finally able to chat with you after, instead of just being a Twitter friend. And it's that authentic voice, right? I want, like I said at the beginning, I want to be able to know where you're coming from in order to understand how you got to this opinion that you're in your review that you're telling me, right? And I would actually, so this may sound like blowing smoke, but with Kale being so personal, with Ebert being so personal, I would put you in that league, because you are so.
Appreciate that.
There's a voice, right, that I can hear you, I can see you when you're talking, and that should be true of every critic, right? Every critic should have that, even though they don't. You're not just parroting voices. Again, you've got something to say. If people read your writing, they'll know who you are. I mean, your Unforgettables series, the interviews that you've been doing, that 1001 Great Films. Seriously, I can't recommend that enough. Like, I think I tweeted it out. This is the 3rd time I've read it, just because it's so personable and so involving. And
it's 10 essays. I don't know how you just read them all again. I mean, that's a lot of time. So thank you.
Yeah, I have to set aside a couple hours just to kind of soak it in. But again, I needed to have that to be able to, come to this conversation and chat with you. So again, Sara, thank you for coming on and chatting about this. A lot of the things you said about Face Off are stuff that I've always wanted to say. And I think that's the same thing with movies. Movies have a way of visualizing or vocalizing things that we can't say. And it's great having you out there as a voice vocalizing what you feel. Again, I'm a big supporter of you and I'm a big fan of your writing. So keep on doing that. How can people find you on the interweb?
Well, you can always find me at moviefreak.com. You can also always find me in the Seattle Gay News. So please definitely check out both those places. I am still on Twitter. Who knows how much longer any of us will still be on Twitter, but I am on Twitter and I'm fairly active on Twitter. It's Movie Freak Sara. I'm also on Instagram. You'll have to search my name because I can never actually ever remember what my handle is on Instagram. So
it's a play on the same thing, though, right?
It's play on the same thing, though, so it's not that hard to find.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, I'm at all of the normal, usual places, Facebook, whatnot. I've always been one that just wants my work to speak for me, and so I'm not the best self-promoter. I'll just put it that way, because I just want the work to stand on its own. And sometimes I think it does. And a lot of times, like I said, I'm my own worst critic and I think I dropped the ball. But I think we're all like that in some ways.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of poetry to be found in your writing. So yeah, everybody please check out Sara Michelle Fetters. Again, thank you, Sara. I look forward to more conversations in the future.
Anytime. This has been an honor and I've had a lot of fun.
Okay. We appreciate you. Thank you. And we're back again. Big giant thank you to Sara M. Fetters. I'm so glad that we're able to have that conversation with her. Please go out and find her writing, and just very personal, introspective stuff. And I can't recommend her writing enough. But yeah, since you, Jonny, were absent for the conversation, and I felt bad because I know that you and I loved Face Off when it came out in theaters. So I did, instead of doing like a top 3 or whatever, I thought we could just have a conversation about, like we do with Jurassic Park with Jason and Binge Movies. Just let's talk about your feelings about the movie, and we'll just have a quick brief chat. You were telling me off air that your feelings have changed about the movie since the last time you saw it, right?
Yeah. I mean, like you said, we saw it together for the first time, and I want to quickly talk about our routine when we were in high school / our beginning college years. After school was over, we just head over to your house, and you would offer me a drink and a candy bar or something, and then we'd choose a movie, and that was our routine. It was like I didn't have to even ask for a drink anymore. I just walk in, sit down, you'd have a drink in my hand. So I had my root beer that you gave me and a candy bar, and we popped in Face Off, and it was a great fun experience. And I remember really, really liking it, like just really enjoying the movie, just having a great time. It was action packed. It was entertaining. It was stylized, obviously, with John Woo's direction. And so you had this, everything kind of came together, and the acting with John Travolta and Nicolas Cage. It was so fun. It was really a fun movie to watch. And I always kind of look back on it fondly because there's a lot of things they did that I really like as far as how they put it together and, all the different things. But I watched.
You were actually gone for 2 years, right? So I remember seeing it in the theater, and I do remember popping that root beer. Watch this, man. This is I think writing you letters and things like that. I was like, this is great. Let's watch this. So we finally, I think there was a build up to it, but yeah.
So there was that as well. But watching it recently, I do have some different thoughts about it. I think it's mainly because this is kind of what happens. This is a good example of when you're nostalgic for a movie and then you go back and you're 20, 30 years older, you're more mature, you see things differently now. And that's the whole reason for our podcast, because I saw this movie in a different way this time, and it didn't hit me the same way. Yes, it's still exciting, it's still got some good action scenes, it's got some good acting, but the whole idea of the movie is just so silly and ridiculous. It's just so so I had a really hard time getting past how silly the idea was. And so it was I kept finding holes and joking about it and pointing fingers at stuff. And there's just some moments in the movie that just make me just want to turn it off and walk out. I just go, I can't keep doing this. It's so over the top and so crazy. But one of the things I wanted to point out was this. There is the scene where Nicolas Cage is trying to, convince Joan Allen that he is Travolta, whatever. And in that scene, it didn't really strike me as weird when I first saw it. I bought it. I was like, okay, whatever. I didn't really think much of it. But listen to it again. Listen to his monologue explaining how they were on this date and she chipped a tooth and they had to find an all-night dentist who was drunk and fixed the wrong tooth. It was like, please stop. Like, just stop. It's bad writing that I couldn't even take it anymore.
Wow.
And it just was so cringy. And even Nicolas Cage's performance and how he delivered those lines about like fixing the wrong tooth and laughing and crying at the same time. And it was like, there's a better way to do this. You can convince her that you're her husband, other than telling by the way, why is there an all-night dentist? And why is he drunk? And wouldn't he know which tooth to fix? And there's so many things wrong with that story that I can't even, my hurts my head to think about it. So I was like, it's things like that kept happening throughout the movie that I was like, that's kind of silly. That's kind of dumb. So even though I still look fondly on our experience when I first watched it. And, you know, I always liked the movie, but it's just ridiculous. It's just so dumb. But however, I will say this though, I still love the John Woo, you know, stylized direction. I love the slow motion. I love the doves in the background. I love the 5-way Mexican standoffs. All those things are so fun. And I miss that about movies. I miss that they can't do these things anymore. And I want more of that. And so whenever it would go into the John Woo-isms and all that kind of stuff, I was back on board. But it would go into the story and this how just crazy the ideas of two people changing their faces and stuff. It's just like I would just tune out. But it'd get me back whenever they'd be like, you know, now we're back to John Woo stuff. So
well, again, I'm not going to go like too deep because obviously we just talked with Sarah about that. But that's one of the things we definitely talked about. Like, it's funny that you talked about that monologue. Because again, to me, the movie, it is so ridiculous. Like, did they switch bodies? Like, not just faces? Like, how would Eve not know her husband's body? You know what I mean? It's like how, and so I agree with it. There's so many things that are going on. And I think the thing again that was for me, it's that the drama and the human parts kind of ground all. I just think that it is so ridiculous, but that's why we go to see movies. It's like, I think I mentioned this, Wizard of Oz isn't believable, but everybody loves Wizard of Oz. You know what I mean? But it's just that suspension of disbelief that it's different for everybody. And I get that. I think because Face Off has been just in regular rotation and I do watch it like every other year and constantly. And so I'm still in the moment. So even that monologue, I think it gets me, the Cage monologue. It still does something for me. So it's just, it's great hearing that because like some of the things in it are so overdone that it's like, well, all right. But again, it's the human stuff would ground a lot of for me anyway. And so, but
I do enjoy watching the boat chase at the end and trying to find out where the stunt actors are and where the actors are. Kind of going, pausing it, you know, okay, there's a stunt guy, and there's Cage, there's a stunt guy, there's Travolta.
Right. Well, we didn't cover this in the episode, I don't think, but it's very old fashioned. Like, you watch all these old movies and you can tell that they're stuntmen. I think there's part of the movie that is charming for me because that's not them. You can obviously tell, but it's like, but this is what we go, again, it's what we go to movies for, but it's that suspension of disbelief.
And I'm not taking away the fact that it's entertaining. It's entertaining. It's a fun
absolutely.
movie. If you can suspend disbelief, you can enjoy this movie.
Right.
So if you're kind of, I saw it differently for some reason. And so it was kind of like, I don't know if I can keep watching this movie.
Well, you don't want your memories of it to be dampened, right? You kind of want to hold on to that good experience that you had instead of having it change. So that makes total sense. Again, Travolta, Cage, total blast watching these guys just kind of riff on each other. And so I think really that's where, and the John Woo-isms, like, I think this is his best American movie, like I said before, but it's a great watch, and it's, even though it's ridiculous.
By the way, I worked on a movie with Joan Allen, and she was in a movie called Bonneville, and she's basically the same as she is in the movie. If you watch her in Face Off, that's how she is in real life. That's how she felt to me. It was kind of like, she was, out of the three, there was Jessica Lange, Kathy Bates, and Joan Allen in the movie together. Yeah. And Kathy Bates was obviously the vibrant one. She had the most personality. Jessica Lange was kind of flighty. Like she was there and present, but she was like off in her own world. But Joan Allen was like so stoic and so serious and so like just straight faced the whole time. It's kind of like
interesting.
She's just like the character in Face Off. It's funny.
I think we talked about that, but I didn't know it was Joan Allen. I think we talked about Kathy Bates being in. So I do know you talked about Bonneville before. So Jessica Lange, that's a surprise to me too. So
Yeah.
Lots of stories. I like that you have all these tie-ins. So yeah, that's fun. But yeah, so anyway, great conversation about Face Off. Great conversation with you about Face Off. That is the point of Nostalgia Cast, kind of having different viewpoints at different times in our lives. But so for our next movie, so it's your choice. What did you want to chat about next time on Nostalgia Cast 90s Palooza?
All right. Well, I know we had a guest say you can't be nostalgic for this movie, but I am nostalgic for this movie, and that is Martin Scorsese's Goodfellas.
Oh,
I have to talk about Goodfellas. I think it came out in 1990, somewhere around there, right?
yes.
So it kind of like started the decade off, and it was a great way to start the decade. And so I think it's a great way to kind of end our season close to anyway, because we're gonna talk about some other movies here and there. But Goodfellas is definitely one on the list that we have to talk about.
Oof. So I know we covered Back to the Future. I know we've covered It's a Wonderful Life. You could make arguments for some Princess Bride, some other movies that we tackled, Jurassic Park. But Goodfellas might be one of the spoilers. It might be one of the greats that we've ever covered for this show. So,
and then again, Scorsese was a big influence in the 90s as well.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I mean, there's so many filmmakers. I mean, we've covered how many Rob Reiner movies?
Yeah.
And we've yet to cover a Scorsese movie. I think we've done one Steven Spielberg movie, no Coppola's. And so, no Coppola. We covered The Rainmaker. So we have Scorsese's. Yeah, that's on a list. So man, thank you for deciding on that one. That'll be great. So yeah, let's talk some gangsters. Let's talk some Joe Pesci doing a really scary role and then a funny role in Home Alone, and how weird that dichotomy and that split is. Let's go ahead and chat about that. We're going to love having you back to chat about that movie, guys. And so again, everybody, thank you for listening. Thanks for sticking with us. I hope you guys are having as much fun as we are, right?
I'm having fun.
Yeah, I guess that's all that matters. Screw the rest of you. We're having fun, so you should have fun too. Okay, so next time we'll talk about Goodfellas. Until then, I'm Darin Lundberg.
And I'm Jonny Craddock.
Anyway, so we'll be seeing you next time with this face, this ridiculous chin.
I want to take his face.
Oh, all right. We'll catch you next time, guys.